the slot. I think when he got moved back to the outside, he looked better. The problem is just they didn't have another slot guy to fill in for him. And you even had a couple of games where, like, I think the Atlanta game in week 4, they just didn't use a traditional slot. They just played 3 safeties the whole time, and that worked for that game. Obviously, they weren't able to do that for the rest of the season. So I think they just kind of ended up in this problem where they just didn't really have an answer at slot corner, no matter what they did with, shuffling players around. You can get one of your corners on the line of scrimmage, just jamming people, and then you can have the other one kind of play more a little bit off and stuff like that. So that's like the best fix for it. But I think, kind of like you mentioned, it would be a little bit easier for them to construct like a holistic defense if both of their outside corners were, had similar strengths and weaknesses.
So as we talk about prospects, we're going to move over to the draft coverage, man. You've done some analysis on 2 top receiver prospects that Washington fans have, they've been clamoring over since Carson Wentz landed in Washington. Alabama's Jameson Williams and OSU's Garrett Wilson. AJ, that's Jameson Williams is his boy. He's telling us that we need to draft that man regardless of what that injury status looking like right now. So I guess I'll go with the first question. Who is between those two? I mean, obviously they're some of the top 5 in the draft class in terms of their position, but who was your number 1 receiver between the two, and who was your second, and why? What's going on, y'all? This is Jamal, your host of the Trap or Die podcast, and I'm just here to tell you, man, while you're here, if you're new, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow us, man, as we continue to push out this content and create some things for the Washington Commanders and the NFL, man, but mainly the Commanders. This is a Washington channel. I want everybody to be involved. I want everybody to catch these live streams weekly. I want everybody to be a part of this growth that we got going on over here, man. So if you're here, if you're new, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you stay tuned, man, for much more content, fire content, and as we keep things pushing, man. So yeah, get to it. We appreciate it. All that good stuff. Peace.
Heritage,
yes, sir.
Of the world that was
yes.
everyday community that participated, that was
sir.
Around.
Change
to Dan, and
that man Dre was having a heart attack in that video. Boy, I don't know what he was doing. Let me go ahead and change this and remove this thing right quick. Boom, and then boom. There we go. All right. We are here. Welcome back to another episode of the Trap or Die podcast, provided to you by 214 Media. I'm your host, Marley Mall, and Dog Mall, Coach Mall, all that good stuff. AJ Dre is in here with us. First and foremost, we got a pretty packed show today. First off, Derrik Klassen, is checking in to start things off, and then we have Benjamin St. Juice shortly after to check in and talk some Commanders ball and see how Ben has been handling everything as a professional. It's been 1 year, so I guess we're going to see how everything's been going over the past year. So with that being said, if you are not watching on Twitch, make sure you find your way over to Twitch. This one is exclusively on that app, on that website. YouTube will get it later. They will get it last. But make sure you are following if you are not following over there. All right. Now that that's done, fellas, how y'all doing? AJ, Dre, y'all good?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, man. Always ready.
All right. Already. And then we have Derrik Klassen. Derrik Klassen is a film analyst for Football Outsiders and covers the NFL draft for Bleacher Report. Once again, Derrik, I do appreciate you checking in and joining us tonight, my man. How are you feeling?
I'm doing good, y'all. I think this is my first time doing a Washington only podcast, so very, very glad to knock that off the list.
That's good. That's good, man. Cause I think and we talked about it, Derrik, but one of the reasons why I reached out to you is I appreciated the work that you did, and I had found your article just covering, for context purposes, for those who are listening and watching, for context purposes, you had covered Washington's early season issues. And the reason why I thought that it was a good idea, and I think that it's prevalent, is because while the issues that were going on were very obvious and an issue early on, it still lingered as the season went on, and we still have the defensive staff here. We still have majority of the players here, and I think it's important to kind of refocus our situation. We've talked about Carson Wentz a ton of times in terms of the Washington community, but we're not focusing on the important parts, and that's the coaching, that's the players, that's the communication, and how they fit in this defense. So before we transition to the receiver prospects and Carson Wentz, let's go ahead and talk about kind of your article and your findings. I guess the first part is, I mean, obviously you mentioned mainly the defensive backs, but what were your takeaways from how the defensive backs were utilized on the field in the games that you saw?
Right. So kind of like you mentioned, it kind of became almost two separate problems. I think for the first 6 or so weeks of the season, they were playing Fuller out of the slot a lot, which, like, in terms of trying to get their best 5, defensive backs on the field, that was probably the best way to do it, right? With William Jackson on the outside, Benjamin St-Juste, who I think is more of an outside player, and then kicking Fuller inside to the slot. The problem is Fuller is just not that comfortable out of the slot. He was probably, like, theoretically their best guy for it, just given what the roster was, but that's not what he's comfortable at. He's comfortable playing, like, off zone from the outside, being able to trap plays that way. So I think he was just not fully comfortable from the slot. I think when he got moved back to the outside, he looked better. The problem is just they didn't have another slot guy to fill in for him. And you even had a couple of games where, like, I think the Atlanta game in week 4, they just didn't use a traditional slot. They just played 3 safeties the whole time, and that worked for that game. Obviously, they weren't able to do that for the rest of the season. So I think they just kind of ended up in this problem where they just didn't really have an answer at slot corner, no matter what they did with, shuffling players around.
And as we talk about the shuffling and obviously understanding Kendall Fuller's fit, and we're definitely going to circle back around to Kendall Fuller in particular. Another key part of having a very good secondary and a very good defense on all 3 levels as well is communication. And one of the things that you highlighted as well was the communication on the back end. And it's hard to, like, pinpoint exactly what communication is when you watch film. You can see some things, you can see signs, you can see people pointing, you can see people helmets turning, things like that. But for you, were you able to identify in what ways they were struggling? Like I said, it's going to be hard to identify or pinpoint exactly what communication looks like, but were you able to identify some issues in that regard?
I think, like you said, that's kind of the problem, is you don't know exactly what they're checking into. So you don't actually know, like, which guy is at fault. If it's like, if this was supposed to be a cover 4 check, then maybe the corner is at fault. If it was supposed to be a cover 2 check, then maybe the safety is at fault. And you kind of don't know. Like you said, you're kind of just looking at the fact that they're trying to communicate, and then clearly somebody gets something wrong. And I think almost more than any other defense in the league, that was a huge problem for them. I think what also was kind of a problem for them structurally was they were playing a lot of their zones, like, really heavily from top down. They really did not want to get beat over the top. The problem was they still had all these other communication errors, and William Jackson, I think, got burned more than they thought he was going to when they signed him. So you have this, like, defense that is theoretically playing to take away a lot of deep shots, but they're busting in so many scenarios because of communication that they're not even accomplishing the thing they're trying to accomplish. So you're giving up deep shots and you're giving away all these underneath throws because you're playing top down. It just, structurally, it was tough. And then, like I said earlier, just in terms of the roster construction, I don't think they had all the guys that they wanted to back there.
Now, Derrik, did you happen to see a difference? I mean, I seen it, but you're reviewing these games more frequently than I am. Did you happen to see a difference in how they were playing schematically in the secondary, especially after their bye week? So I think after the bye, they ended up playing Tampa Bay as the first game. Did you see a difference in how that communication was breaking down, and maybe the utilization of William Jackson's strengths of being a press man corner?
I think the press man thing is exactly spot on. It kind of seemed like as the year went on, they just started to lean back into what truthfully Del Rio wants to do, which is to play a lot of man. I think earlier in the year, they tried to get a bit more zone heavy. Maybe that has to do with, like, they weren't trusting their linebackers in man. I mean, I think that could have been certainly part of it. And then again, I think having Kendall Fuller in the slot early, you don't really want him playing man to man that much. But then I think, to your point, like, as the season went on, they fully realized, you know what, we paid William Jackson a lot of money. we need to simplify this team somehow. Maybe just playing a little bit more man-to-man was the way to go. I don't think it necessarily fixed anything for them. I think they were still a pretty bad defense down the stretch, but I at least understand why they tried to make that shift.
Derek, how would you grade Bobby McCain's performance as the season went on this year? Washington brought him back. I thought he got a little bit better as the season went on. Early in the season, there was some miscommunication issues. I'm not sure if they were all on him, but would you say he's a pretty good fit for them and what Jack Del Rio likes to do at the free safety spot?
I think he should be, and I think you're right. He got better as the year went on. I think a lot of his thing is just like, because he's not this like special athlete, he's going to take time wherever he needs to be. So I think just the fact that, one, their defense was kind of weird just in terms of how they were throwing around personnel generally. They were doing a lot of switching like what assignments players were taking on early on. So I think you combine that with him like still being new there. It was just really hard for him to get his feet under him. But then, like you said, as the year went on, as they kind of just asked him to be a little bit more of just a true safety, which I think is what he did best, like back in Miami, I think he was able to be a little bit more comfortable.
So one person, what's going on, TZ? So one person that was mentioned early on, and I guess we don't have to spend too much time there, but Montel brought up in the chat, he brought up Jimmy Moreland. Now, I don't know if you saw a lot of Jimmy Moreland in 2020, but clearly he had some experience within or playing with Jack Del Rio, and they obviously decided to let him go this year. Was there some people that stood out to you in terms of what made Washington's defense as? Because I personally don't even think it was great, even with the statistics telling you it was top 5 in 2020. I don't think it was that good, but it was adequate. It was sufficient. And what do you think that some of those pieces like Ron Darby or maybe Jimmy Moreland or some other people on the back end or the front, the linebackers and stuff like that, is there anybody that kind of made this defense a little bit better than what it was in 2021?
I think a lot of it is the cornerback play. I think Moreland was better than a lot of the guys they had last year. I also think, theoretically, William Jackson is and should be better than Ronald Darby, and I think at his peak he has been better than Ronald Darby. But I would say that season, Ronald Darby 2020 was better than whatever Jackson gave Washington in 2021. Yeah. I think that can absolutely turn around because, like I said, Jackson, especially when he was in Cincinnati, looked really, really good. So I expect Jackson to sort of have this rebound and I think fix the problem that way. But I would just say the cornerback play was a little different. And then, truthfully, a big problem they had is because they were playing so top down on everything in a lot of their zone stuff in 2021. Their pass rush just couldn't get home. And because it was so uninspired with what they were doing up front, there were a lot of just we're just going to throw our 4 guys and they're just going to go. And it wasn't even that creative. So I think when you mix that stuff together, it kind of made it tricky for them to actually get home and help out the secondary at all. Whereas in 2020, when they were just a better secondary period, it gave the front a little bit more time, even for as uninspired as it was, to just get home anyway.
So here's one of my things with Fuller and Jackson, and you kind of touched on it without actually going into full detail with this angle. But obviously Fuller, and in your opinion, obviously is the off zone guy, and William Jackson is the press man guy. Their starting DBs or cornerbacks have 2 different strengths. Their main strengths. Obviously, it's important for them to have some type of sufficiency in both man and zone and off coverage and things like that, and the other techniques that they run. But if their strength is off zone and press man, how are you kind of merging that together to make a decent unit, a collective unit? I kind of feel like Washington, while you're adding talent, you kind of the chemistry is a little different. You don't have one staple on that defense. You don't have an identity. You don't have we're a zone defense or we're a man defense. We have a good man guy and we have a good zone guy, and we have everything else in between that.
It definitely does put them in a weird position, and it's not. I think it's why they ran into all the trouble that they did last year, is because they didn't have a clear identity. What I would say is that I think you can kind of make it work in the way that Vic Fangio has kind of made that work. Back when he was in Chicago, they had Kyle Fuller actually and Prince Amukamara, and that was kind of similar to what Washington has right now, where the Fuller brothers are actually extremely similar in the way they play. So they're both this off They want to be able to like trigger down. They want to be able to tackle. They want to like break stuff up at the catch point, that sort of stuff. Whereas Amukamara, kind of like Jackson, it's really more just like a press man kind of guy. But when you're playing a lot of the, tight quarters and tight cover 6 stuff that Fangio was playing back in Chicago and stuff, you can get one of your corners on the line of scrimmage just jamming people. And then you can have the other one kind of play more a little bit off and stuff like that. So that's like the best fix for it. But I think kind of like you mentioned, it would be a little bit easier for them to construct like a holistic defense if both of their outside corners were, had similar strengths and weaknesses.
Hey, Derek, I also had a question. Shifting kind of to the middle of the field, how big or huge is the middle linebacker position for this Washington defense? A lot of people seem to think this has been a need for the team for years now, probably since London Fletcher left. Is that something that can really change the landscape of this defense, or is it a little bigger than that?
I mean, I think it would help because I think what we're seeing, especially now in the NFL, the like middle of your defense is becoming, I think, a lot more important, especially if we're going to move to a lot more of these 2 high structures, which even if that's not necessarily what Del Rio wants to major in, it's just the reality of the NFL and he's going to have to do it. And so I think when Washington was as bad as they were at slot last year and then as iffy as they were at linebacker, I think it caused a lot of problems. So I think for them, it would be really nice if they could have linebackers who, to me, really could just do a lot more in coverage. Like, I just don't think that what they have right now can do anything beyond like very simple top down spot drop zone type of stuff. They're not really guys who can like run up vertical with the 3. I don't think they play what's behind them particularly well. And I really don't trust them to run man to man in coverage underneath. So I think if you can get guys who can do a little bit more in coverage and just like unlock your toolbox in that sense, I think that could go, a long way in kind of helping out this defense. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Dre brings that up. Man, I was up until 5 a.m. for some reason watching All or Nothing on Amazon, the Carolina Panthers season, and just seeing the command that Luke Kuechly had over that middle linebacker position, and on the weak side, Thomas Davis being able to, defend guys like a Jordan Reed, different tight ends that they were playing against. And when you look at this Washington team, they don't have any linebacker that could do any of those things or even necessarily have command over the defense in the huddle or just aligning guys correctly. So who do you see as like a second tier? Because obviously we don't see them going after big tier guys like a Bobby Wagner or Tyrann Mathieu at middle linebacker or either safety to help with some of that alignment stuff and communication. Who do you see as a second tier linebacker that could possibly be a great asset to this team as far as like getting some difference in results other than what we've been getting from Holcomb, Mayo, and Jamin Davis?
Yeah, in terms of the free agent linebackers, I don't entirely remember who is left out there outside of obviously Bobby Wagner. In terms of like the draft guys, like Chad Muma is probably going to be there in the second, maybe even third round. And I think to me, he's the best coverage linebacker in the class. He was like a converted safety, but he just does a really, really good job of seeing what's behind him, understanding like how to watch the quarterback's eyes, how to trigger, how to take away windows when they're coming into him. And he obviously has like all the athletic tools to where, if he needs to run vertical, he can do it. If he needs to run across the field, he can do it. If he needs to chase somebody underneath, he can do it. So I think to me, if they are dead set on fixing coverage issues from linebacker, Chad Muma is like the guy. After that, you can maybe look at guys like Brian Asamoah from Oklahoma. I think can kind of do some of that. Quay Walker from Georgia is going to be there probably day 2. I think he's a guy that they could look at for solving that issue. Like, I think Walker in particular is interesting because if you look at the way that Georgia rotated their linebackers, they really, really, really wanted Walker to be the guy who was, pushed out to the field, or if a team was running trips, they wanted Walker to trips. Like, that was their coverage guy. So I think that would be another guy that they could look at to kind of take over responsibility for the middle of the defense.
Well, what about I think his name is Lytle?
Who?
The linebacker from Georgia.
Oh, Tyndall?
Tyndall. Yeah, Tyndall.
Yeah.
My bad.
He's
I got that all wrong.
No, you're good. I mean, if you want a guy who's just going to sprint at full speed into the box and take out a guard, Tyndall is the guy. If they want to fix coverage issues, I'm not entirely sold Tyndall as the guy. I think he's more of like a New England style of linebacker where he's a hitter. He can do a really good job in the box. He can defend the run, but in terms of coverage stuff, I think he's not all the way there yet.
So as we talk about prospects, we're gonna move over to the draft coverage, man. You've done some analysis on 2 top receiver prospects that Washington fans have, they've been clamoring over since Carson Wentz landed in Washington. Alabama's Jameson Williams and OSU's Garrett Wilson. AJ, that's Jameson Williams is his boy. He's telling us that we need to draft that man regardless of what that injury status looking like right now. So I guess I'll go with the first question. Who is between those two? I mean, obviously they're some of the top 5 in the draft class in terms of their position, but who was your number 1 receiver between the two, and who was your second, and why?
I tend to lean towards Jameson Williams. Like his speed, like the easy reason to love him is his speed, right? Like I see AJ getting all excited. I mean, like the easy reason is speed. He's incredibly fast. He's super explosive. That stuff is really easy to see. What honestly shocked me when I went and watched him on film, was like he's a really clean and smart route runner. Like he is, I think maybe the best in the class at route running, just in terms of understanding like how to tempo stuff to like get cornerbacks to bite on stuff. The way he gets in and out of his breaks is incredibly clean. Like he doesn't waste any steps. He's so smooth about like not drifting too far when he takes like an outbreaking route or something. Like his route running is just phenomenal. So you couple that with probably the fastest and most explosive guy at the position, he's just going to be able to get open however and whenever he wants to. So even if he's not going to be like the best contested catch guy or like the biggest threat to, catch a tough dig route over the middle or whatever, I think just the way that he can get open and take the top off the defense is pretty special.
How is his
and I mean,
reaction?
Go ahead. I was just going to say, man, and Derek had a amazing, beautiful write-up and also clips showing exactly what he just described. So if you're out there and you want to find out more about Jameson Williams, definitely check out Derrick's website, because he shows you exactly what I've been saying. He's the number 1 wide receiver in this class. I don't care about the ACL injury, nothing of that nature. He's 6'2". Yeah, he has a smaller frame, but literally that speed is not the only thing that he can do. He's a crisp route runner, and he definitely knows at an early age in his career how to utilize the speed to play off of different things, such as a curl route, a slant route, different things. It's not just a post guy. So, yeah, I just wanted to chime in and said, man, Derek did a great job of breaking that down and getting fans the opportunity to understand that he's not just a fly route guy. He's a technician even with his routes.
Yeah, I was about to ask about because we talked about the route running, and I just wondered, like, the release part is also something that people don't always take into account. And the more I dig into how positions are ran from start to finish, releasing is also good. How's he handling coverages? How does he understand like the press man or the soft press and things like that? Is he able to win against the multiple coverages that he'll look against?
I think he, like, as far as beating press, I think the best way to put it is he like crosses the bar. I don't think he's the best at beating press, kind of like, as AJ mentioned, he's a little bit slight of frame. He's not the toughest and most physical player. I mean, he's like a tough player. He's willing to take hits and stuff. He just doesn't have the strength and weight behind him. So sometimes getting off press can be tough, but I think he actually does a pretty good job of like being patient at the line of scrimmage and letting the cornerbacks like strike come into him so that he can do something for it. He's not just like waiting and taking the hit and praying that he can just like run past it or knock off the hit. So I think he does a fairly decent job of like understanding that press is coming and how to beat it. It's just that against some of the truly elite press corners, the Jalen Ramseys, the James Bradburys, the guys who can really bully you, he might not have his best days.
Yeah, but see, even with that, the con of that, if you are the press man, you're gonna get beat once he gets past you.
Yes, if he does get you one time, it's over.
Yeah, you're not really gonna press him. But I wanted to ask a question about Drake London. I think Maul made a tweet earlier about his lack of something about separation.
Yeah, foot speed. Yep.
Yeah, I actually don't think that he should be a top 10 draft pick. I'm not really seeing the separation that I would want out of a top 10 wide receiver, and especially going against Pac-12 cornerbacks, which is, like Pac-12 defense is trash overall. How do you think his conversion to the NFL will be, and who can you really compare his game to? Because a lot of people are saying Mike Evans, but I'm not seeing that. Mike Evans is a big, tall guy, but he can actually move for his size. Like,
it's tough. I honestly think London does move and separate fairly well. I think a big part of the problem is their quarterback just sucked. So the ball was coming out late a lot of the times, and he didn't have a very good arm. So the ball was like arriving late after having already gotten out late. So I think that kind of makes London look more covered than he is in a lot of scenarios. I don't think he moves, nearly as well as, some of the smaller guys like Williams or Olave or Wilson. He obviously can't quite move that well because that's just the reality of being 6'4". But I think for that size, he actually moves fairly well.
Yeah, he's very
the Mike Evans stuff is like, he's just not that strong like that. Like he's just doesn't have as much weight as Evans, so he's not quite that big. But I don't know. I think to me, he's still like a top 15 caliber receiver. I still probably prefer Williams, but I think London moves exceptionally well for his size. It's just going to be a matter of, there probably will be some adjustment going from Pac-12 corners to legit NFL cornerbacks and figuring out how to separate at his size that way.
Okay, Derek, I got this question. As far as the wide receiver position goes, you're sitting there at 11. You take into account Jameson's injury. 4 wide receivers are sitting there. You got Jameson, Olave, Garrett Wilson, and London. Who are you taking for Washington?
If they clear the medicals, I think it should be Williams. There's obviously going to be, some skill overlap in terms of, they just took like a guy like De'Ami Brown, who's also like a speedster who's going to win down the field. But I think at this point, like Williams is so good that it doesn't matter. Like you just take him anyway. And also, like we were talking about, Williams isn't just a speed guy. I think he can legit just get open from any route on the outside. So I think even with some of the overlap with Brown, that's not going to be a problem. If they either don't clear the medical or they want like a different type of receiver, I'm actually fine with London at that spot because I think London would kind of like fill out the rest of the receiver room in terms of like the exact type of body they're missing at that position.
So before we get out of here, Carson Wentz, man. Carson Wentz was traded about a week or 2 ago, something like that, to Washington. And compensation aside, just looking at Washington's offense, knowing the pieces that they currently have, and assuming that they'll add a little bit more in the draft, how do you see Carson Wentz working in Washington from a schematic standpoint, but also like overall? Do you think it works here, or do you think it's going to be a one and done situation?
I think it's going to kind of be a one and done situation, just because, like, to me, so part of the reason you would maybe want to be optimistic about Wentz at this point is that he was definitely better last year than he was in 2020. In 2020, he was arguably the worst quarterback in the sport. Last year, he was merely like average, maybe below. Like, I think he was like a below average quarterback who produced like an average one because Frank Reich is, to me, incredible. And I think they just had a really good offensive setup. So, but the thing is also, like, if that is as best as he's going to be able to get, in recovering his career or whatever, I don't think that's really enough to make Washington any sort of serious offense. And then I also think like that Indianapolis situation was so perfect for him to be the best version of whatever is left of him, because Frank Reich was a dude who was, very willing to go to bat for him. And like, that's not really going to happen, I think, in Washington. I think he doesn't quite have that sort of backing. And then also, I just think Frank Reich is like a better play caller than the guys they have in Washington. Not necessarily that Washington has like a terrible offensive system or anything. I just, I'll die for Frank Reich. So
I disagree. Scott Turner's trash.
At this point, it's just unproven, and it's crazy. He's been in the league for like 5-6 years as the OC, but he still has never. He doesn't show like the potential of. He knows what he's doing type thing. Like, I don't know. Like, there's a consensus that we just don't know, and that's the problem. That's part of the problem.
And to me, like with Turner, it's like I think he does interesting things. I think he has not quite fully figured out how to make like a cohesive offense. Like, honestly, their gun run game was one of the best in the NFL. It's just that, like, as a collective offense, they haven't found a way to make everything mesh together. And maybe that part is, they just have not had the quarterback talent to do it. It's just that my counter to that would be, I don't think Wentz is the talent that's going to do it either. So.
Absolutely. Hey, Derrik, man, I definitely appreciate you hopping on with us tonight, man. And it's been a pleasure to talk some Washington defense. I'm looking forward to the conversations in the future, see what you find with these guys. And also, maybe we can get you on around the draft time, see if we happen to pick up any of the guys that you watched. In terms of plug talk, man, the floor is yours to let the people know what you got going on, where they can find you, read from you, and hear from you, big dog.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. Like I said, first Washington podcast I've ever done, so that was nice to have. You guys can find me on Twitter at QBKlass, QBKlass. I will be doing draft stuff over at Football Outsiders, and then I'll also be doing some draft stuff, specifically front seven, over at Bleacher Report.
Absolutely.